The summer of 1944 had already tested the resolve of Allied forces across Europe, yet nothing could prepare the young American soldiers for the shock awaiting them in the fields of Normandy. Amid the hedgerows and villages, they were about to confront not just German soldiers, but Hitler's most feared and disciplined units, the Waffen-SS. These were troops trained to strike with precision, ruthless efficiency, and unwavering loyalty to the Nazi cause. For the Americans, many of whom had never faced combat, the sight of these elite forces was both terrifying and surreal, a sudden confrontation with a war they had only glimpsed through briefings and newsreels. The encounter occurred near the Bocage country, where thick hedgerows, sunken lanes, and dense vegetation turned the landscape into a labyrinth of concealment and ambush. American troops advancing from the beaches found themselves suddenly under heavy fire. Machine guns cut through the air, and artillery shells tore craters into the ground. The SS had chosen their positions carefully, knowing every ridge, hollow, and farm lane that could be used to maximize their advantage. The Americans, exhausted from weeks of landing operations, training, and preparation, were forced to respond with courage, improvisation, and a growing sense of the grim reality of war. For many of the GIs, the first moments of contact were chaotic and terrifying. The disciplined German fire, combined with the shock of close-quarters combat, caused initial confusion. Officers shouted orders over the roar of gunfire, squads formed hasty defensive positions, and medics moved from one wounded soldier to the next. Despite the fear and the chaos, a sense of cohesion began to emerge. These Americans, many of them barely adults, discovered a resilience forged through months of training, shared hardship, and the awareness that their comrades depended on them. The SS, highly trained and indoctrinated, fought with relentless aggression. Their attacks were coordinated, precise, and often brutal, leaving little room for hesitation. American forces quickly realized that traditional tactics alone would not suffice. The hedgerows forced adaptation, improvisation, and an acute awareness of the terrain. Small unit leadership became crucial, and the courage of individual soldiers often made the difference between life and death. In those first hours, the Americans learned the lethal efficiency of Hitler's elite, while simultaneously discovering their own capacity for resolve under fire. Amid the chaos, acts of heroism became both frequent and necessary. Soldiers risked life and limb to rescue wounded comrades, carry ammunition under fire, or maneuver around enemy positions to flank the SS. Each engagement was a brutal test of endurance, nerves, and tactical ingenuity. Leaders emerged from the ranks, and soldiers who had once doubted their abilities found themselves executing maneuvers that would later be studied as lessons in courage and adaptability. This baptism of fire revealed both the ferocity of the enemy and the nascent effectiveness of American combat leadership. As the day wore on, the Americans began to stabilize their positions. Using a combination of suppressive fire, careful coordination with artillery, and small unit flanking attacks, they managed to blunt the SS offensive. Each success came at a high cost, but with every advance, the young soldiers gained confidence and understanding. They learned how to exploit terrain, how to anticipate elite tactics, and how to survive against an opponent trained to dominate and intimidate. The day became a crucible, forging experience and resilience that would define the rest of their campaign across Europe. By the end of that first engagement, both sides bore scars, physical and psychological. For the Americans, it was a stark initiation into the realities of combat against an enemy that had been meticulously trained and ideologically driven. For the SS, it was a first encounter with soldiers who, despite inexperience and exhaustion, refused to break. The clash would echo throughout subsequent battles, establishing a mutual recognition of skill, tenacity, and the unforgiving nature of the war. Ultimately, that day marked more than just a tactical encounter. It symbolized the collision of two worlds. On one side, the disciplined, ideologically charged German elite. On the other, young Americans thrust into a fight that demanded courage, adaptability, and endurance beyond imagination. The lessons learned, the bonds forged, and the sacrifices made would reverberate through the remainder of the European campaign, shaping the outcome of battles and the character of the soldiers who survived them. It was the moment when America first faced the true measure of Hitler's elite and emerged tempered, battle-hardened, and resolute. The morning following the initial clash brought a grim realization to the American commanders. They were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered in previous engagements. The Waffen-SS units were not merely soldiers. They were a machine of precision, trained to move, fire, and react as a single organism. Their coordination on the battlefield was instinctive, honed through relentless training and ideological indoctrination. The hedgerows and sunken lanes of Normandy, already treacherous, became arenas where ambushes were executed with deadly efficiency. Every hedge concealment, every farmhouse, and every tree line had the potential to conceal a lethal force, turning the landscape into an intricate web of danger. American troops, many of whom had been fresh from basic training and limited combat experience, were forced to adapt in real time. Small unit leadership became critical as platoon leaders made rapid tactical decisions under fire. Riflemen learned the deadly utility of suppressive fire. Machine gun teams coordinated with artillery observers, and squads improvised movements through hedgerows to avoid deadly enfilades. Each engagement was a high-stakes test of courage, decision-making, and improvisation. The soldiers quickly learned that hesitation or miscommunication could result in catastrophic losses, and every choice carried the weight of life and death. The SS leveraged every advantage of terrain, weaponry, and morale. They operated with brutal efficiency, using coordinated flanking maneuvers, overlapping fields of fire, and strategic use of mortars and artillery. Their tactics were designed to exploit the inexperience of the Americans, drawing them into kill zones and then punishing any mistakes. Yet this elite discipline also exposed the Americans to lessons in combat leadership and adaptability. Soldiers who survived the initial ambushes began to recognize patterns in SS behavior, learning to anticipate attacks and counter with decisive action. Every encounter became an education in both fear and resilience. Amid the chaos, individual acts of heroism emerged that would later define the narrative of the battle. Soldiers risked exposure to enemy fire to retrieve wounded comrades or deliver critical supplies. Snipers carefully picked off targets to protect advancing units, while machine gun teams provided cover for infantry movements through open fields. The human element, courage under pressure, and quick-thinking ingenuity often made the difference between survival and death. It was in these moments that the raw, untested American soldiers began to discover the strength, resolve, and leadership potential hidden within themselves. By midday, the Americans began to stabilize their positions. Artillery coordination, tactical flanking, and the use of newly developed infantry maneuvers allowed them to counter some of the SS' aggressive assaults. Observation posts relayed real-time intelligence on enemy positions, allowing commanders to adjust strategy on the fly. These small tactical successes were critical, not only in maintaining ground, but in bolstering morale. Soldiers who had entered the day uncertain and fearful now began to understand their own capabilities, realizing that training, ingenuity, and teamwork could overcome even elite opposition. The psychological impact of facing Hitler's elite became increasingly evident. For many soldiers, the Waffen-SS represented an almost mythic force, fanatically loyal, brutal, and extraordinarily well-trained. Initial encounters bred fear and anxiety, yet these same experiences fostered determination and camaraderie among the American ranks. Men who had been strangers hours before were now bound together by shared trials, facing mortal danger in a landscape that allowed no margin for error. The crucible of combat tested not only physical endurance, but mental resilience, forging the bonds and fortitude that would carry them through the Normandy campaign. As the day progressed, casualty reports began to illustrate the harsh cost of confronting the SS. Yet alongside the grim numbers came lessons in tactics and coordination. Officers refined strategies for hedgerow fighting, integrating artillery, infantry, and armor in ways that leveraged the Americans' growing strengths. Squads developed improvisational techniques for moving through obstructed terrain under fire, creating communication protocols that minimized confusion and enhanced responsiveness. Each small victory, however costly, reinforced the Americans' ability to survive, adapt, and push back against one of the most feared military formations in history. By evening, the Americans had achieved a tentative equilibrium. They held portions of the contested terrain, had repelled some of the SS' most aggressive maneuvers, and had begun to understand the rhythm and methodology of elite German tactics. The day had been a baptism of fire, a brutal, chaotic, and formative experience that tested the limits of courage, leadership, and ingenuity. Soldiers returned to makeshift bivouacs exhausted, yet tempered, carrying not only the physical scars of battle but a newfound understanding of their own resilience. The first confrontation with Hitler's elite had concluded, but its lessons would reverberate throughout the remainder of the war in Europe. The dawn of the following day brought a tense calm over the Normandy fields, a deceptive pause that masked the relentless presence of Hitler's elite forces. The American commanders understood that the Waffen-SS would not remain idle. Their disciplined units were regrouping, reinforcing positions, and preparing for renewed assaults. Soldiers who had survived the initial encounter were already analyzing patterns in enemy movement, learning to predict ambush points, and identifying weak spots in German lines. The landscape, once unfamiliar and intimidating, began to transform into a tactical chessboard where American ingenuity and improvisation met the relentless precision of elite German training. American infantry units had quickly adapted to the treacherous hedgerow terrain. Teams learned to coordinate suppressive fire with rapid movements through small gaps, exploiting any weaknesses in enemy fortifications. Artillery observers, perched in precarious positions, guided barrages with increasing accuracy, softening German positions before infantry advances. Tank units, initially constrained by the close, irregular terrain, began coordinating with infantry to flush out SS machine gun nests. The improvisational strategies developed under fire demonstrated that adaptability and quick decision-making could offset the technical skill and experience of the German elite. The Waffen-SS, aware of the Americans' growing confidence, escalated their aggression. They employed overlapping fields of fire, coordinated counterattacks, and targeted high-value positions to disrupt American advances. Mortar fire rained down unpredictably, cutting supply lines and testing the nerves of even the most experienced soldiers. Despite their fearsome reputation, the SS also began to encounter resistance that forced them to adapt. The Americans' unorthodox tactics, tenacity, and ability to learn from previous engagements made them an increasingly formidable opponent. Each exchange of fire became a brutal lesson in both tactical acumen and human endurance. In these moments of intense combat, individual bravery shone through. Soldiers crawled under enemy fire to rescue comrades, repositioned weapons to cover advancing units, and risked their lives to relay crucial information. The chaos of battle created spontaneous leaders, men who, in the absence of formal command, made decisions that saved lives and altered the outcome of skirmishes. These acts of courage, though often unsung, became the backbone of American resilience, illustrating how ordinary men, when tested under extraordinary circumstances, could rise to extraordinary challenges. By late morning, American forces began exploiting weaknesses in SS deployments. Reconnaissance teams identified poorly defended flanks, and small unit squads executed swift, precise maneuvers to dislodge entrenched positions. Artillery support, coordinated with ground intelligence, created openings that allowed infantry to advance without sustaining catastrophic casualties. Each success, though measured and hard-won, reinforced the soldiers' confidence. The Americans were no longer merely reacting to the SS. They were beginning to shape the battle, using a combination of ingenuity, determination, and learning to counteract the elite forces' initial advantage. The psychological toll of these engagements was immense. Soldiers endured continuous fear, exhaustion, and the shock of witnessing both comrades and enemies fall under fire. Yet amidst this strain, camaraderie and shared purpose strengthened. Men who had entered combat as strangers developed unbreakable bonds, relying on each other for survival and support. Commanders witnessed the transformation of inexperienced troops into effective, adaptive units capable of executing complex maneuvers under pressure. This evolution was as much a mental and emotional victory as it was a tactical one, proving the resilience and determination of the American fighting force. Despite the Americans' gradual mastery of tactics, the SS remained a formidable adversary. Their relentless attacks, disciplined countermeasures, and strategic positioning continued to inflict heavy casualties and create an atmosphere of perpetual danger. Soldiers learned quickly that every advantage gained could be contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse potentially fatal. The engagement became a grueling test of endurance, nerve, and coordination, demanding both individual initiative and collective discipline. The Americans were discovering that victory against Hitler's elite required more than courage. It required continuous adaptation, situational awareness, and an unyielding will to survive. By nightfall, the Americans had held their positions and begun to push back against the SS with cautious optimism. The first encounters had transformed them from inexperienced troops into hardened fighters, capable of understanding and countering elite tactics. Each squad, platoon, and company carried the knowledge of the day's brutal lessons, the memory of comrades lost, and the determination to persevere. The clash with Hitler's elite had not been a decisive victory, but it had been a crucible, a defining moment that forged the capabilities, resilience, and confidence that would carry American forces through the Normandy campaign and beyond. The following morning, the fields and hedgerows of Normandy became a stage for tactical improvisation and raw endurance, as American units prepared for renewed contact with Hitler's elite. Intelligence reports indicated that Waffen-SS units were reinforcing positions along ridges and farmhouses, employing layered defenses to halt any further American advances. Commanders knew that frontal assaults would be costly, demanding a combination of feints, flanking movements, and precise artillery support. Every squad understood that survival depended not just on courage but on rapid adaptation, effective communication, and the ability to anticipate the elite enemy's moves. The young soldiers were now living in a harsh school of combat, where each lesson was taught in blood and fire. The Americans began to refine their hedgerow tactics, learning to use the terrain for both cover and advantage. Engineers and infantry worked together to breach thick vegetation, create lanes for movement, and secure vantage points for machine guns and mortars. Platoons synchronized suppressive fire to allow squads to advance while minimizing exposure. Tank units, previously constrained by narrow lanes, coordinated with infantry to punch through fortified positions, while reconnaissance teams provided real-time information on enemy dispositions. The battlefield was no longer a chaotic struggle. It became a fluid contest of strategy, adaptability, and endurance, where intellect and courage combined to meet the challenge posed by the Waffen-SS. The SS, acutely aware of the Americans' growing effectiveness, intensified their counterattacks. German officers directed their troops with precision, executing ambushes, overlapping fields of fire, and aggressive flanking maneuvers. Mortar and artillery fire targeted American positions relentlessly, forcing soldiers to improvise cover and adapt under constant pressure. Yet, even in these brutal conditions, the Americans began to exploit patterns in SS behavior. Repetition in attack strategy, overconfidence in fortified positions, and predictable patrol schedules allowed experienced troops to anticipate movements and counter them effectively. The young soldiers were learning that elite forces, while formidable, were not invincible. Amid the relentless fighting, extraordinary acts of individual heroism emerged. Soldiers risked everything to drag the wounded from open fire, resupply units under barrage, or neutralize enemy positions threatening entire platoons. Snipers perched in hedgerows picked off critical targets, while machine gun teams provided suppressive fire that allowed infantry to maneuver safely. These acts of courage were not isolated incidents, but essential contributions to the cohesion and survival of the American force. The battlefield became both a test of individual valor and collective discipline, revealing the extraordinary capacity of ordinary men when placed under extraordinary circumstances. By late afternoon, American forces began to consolidate small gains. Coordination between infantry, artillery, and armor allowed units to hold strategic positions, slowly eroding the SS' initial advantage. Observation posts relayed crucial intelligence, enabling commanders to adjust tactics in real time. Each maneuver, each calculated risk, demonstrated a growing mastery of battlefield dynamics. Soldiers who had entered combat with trepidation were now executing complex operations, learning to exploit the enemy's overextensions and vulnerabilities. Confidence, hard-earned and fragile, began to replace the initial shock and fear. The psychological strain of constant combat was immense, yet it forged resilience. Exhausted troops endured continuous enemy fire, navigated treacherous terrain, and witnessed the deaths of comrades, all while maintaining cohesion and morale. Bonds formed in the crucible of shared danger became unbreakable, and small victories reinforced the belief that they could survive and prevail. Commanders observed that the young Americans, once raw and inexperienced, were beginning to think and act like seasoned soldiers, capable of improvisation and decisive action under extreme pressure. Despite these incremental successes, the Waffen-SS remained a relentless opponent. Their tactical skill, ideological fervor, and willingness to fight to the last man made every engagement costly. The Americans learned quickly that victory against Hitler's elite required not only courage but constant vigilance, precise execution, and adaptability. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. The battlefields of Normandy became a harsh school, teaching soldiers lessons that no textbook could convey. Lessons in endurance, strategy, and the human capacity for courage under fire. As night fell, American troops held their ground, exhausted but resolute. The engagements had left a trail of devastation, but also a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced Hitler's elite and survived, learning the rhythms, tactics, and psychology of their formidable opponent. The battle had become more than a fight for terrain. It was a crucible in which soldiers discovered their courage, ingenuity, and resilience. The experience would inform every subsequent operation in Europe, leaving an indelible mark on the men who had faced the full measure of Nazi elite forces and emerged tempered, battle-hardened, and ready for the trials yet to come. The morning after the intense engagements saw American commanders reviewing maps and casualty reports, aware that Hitler's elite forces remained a persistent and lethal threat. Units were reorganized, small gaps in the lines were reinforced, and reconnaissance teams were dispatched to gather intelligence on SS positions. Every hedgerow, sunken lane, and farmhouse now represented a potential ambush point, a lethal trap waiting for the unprepared. Soldiers who had survived the previous encounters carried the memory of shock and loss, but also a new confidence born from their ability to adapt and persevere. They understood that the SS would attack with relentless precision, but they had begun to understand how to counteract elite tactics. American infantry units had refined their movements through the treacherous hedgerows, learning to coordinate suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and synchronized advances with deadly precision. Engineers prepared explosives to breach fortified hedges, creating passages for troops and armor. Artillery observers relayed real-time coordinates, allowing shelling to soften German positions before infantry assaults. Tanks moved in tandem with soldiers, providing cover and firepower while navigating narrow lanes. The battlefield had become a dynamic system where strategy, improvisation, and disciplined execution could challenge even the most formidable SS formations. The Waffen-SS, fully aware of the Americans' increasing effectiveness, intensified their efforts. They executed coordinated counterattacks designed to reclaim lost positions and disrupt supply lines. Mortar and artillery fire fell relentlessly, forcing American soldiers to improvise cover and maneuver under continuous threat. Yet, the GIs had begun to exploit weaknesses in SS deployments. Predictable patrols, overconfidence in fortified positions, and tactical repetition offered opportunities for calculated strikes. Each successful maneuver reinforced confidence and began to shift the momentum in favor of the Americans, proving that adaptability and intelligence could counter elite training. Acts of heroism were both frequent and necessary amid the chaos. Soldiers crawled under enemy fire to rescue the wounded, deliver ammunition, or neutralize machine gun nests threatening entire units. Snipers picked off key targets to allow infantry movements, while machine gun teams provided suppressive cover. Individual courage, coupled with collective discipline, became the backbone of American survival. These small-scale acts, though often invisible in the grand narrative, were pivotal in sustaining morale and operational effectiveness, demonstrating the extraordinary potential of ordinary men under extreme conditions. By afternoon, incremental gains began to accumulate. Coordination between infantry, artillery, and armor allowed units to hold strategic positions, slowly eroding the SS advantage. Observation posts and reconnaissance teams relayed critical intelligence, enabling commanders to adapt tactics in real time. Each maneuver, however small, demonstrated an evolving mastery of battlefield dynamics. Soldiers who had entered the field in fear and uncertainty now executed coordinated attacks, flanking maneuvers, and defensive positioning with growing confidence, turning inexperience into tactical competence. The psychological impact of continuous combat weighed heavily on the men, yet it also forged resilience. Exhaustion, fear, and witnessing the deaths of comrades became the crucible in which cohesion and courage were strengthened. The bonds formed in these conditions were unbreakable, as survival depended on trust, coordination, and collective discipline. Soldiers began to internalize lessons that no training camp could teach: anticipation of enemy moves, improvisation under fire, and the will to endure. Their transformation from raw recruits to battle-hardened soldiers was accelerating, shaping the American force into a cohesive and capable fighting machine. Despite growing confidence, the Waffen-SS remained a formidable adversary. Their training, ideological fervor, and tactical acumen ensured that no advance would go uncontested. Every maneuver by American forces was met with calculated resistance, forcing continuous adaptation and innovation. The Normandy battlefield became a test of endurance, intellect, and courage, where tactical success depended as much on improvisation and observation as on firepower. Each engagement underscored the difficulty of overcoming a seasoned, elite enemy and the cost at which hard-earned lessons were bought. As night fell, American forces held their positions, weary but resilient. The day's battles had inflicted casualties on both sides, yet the Americans had gained critical ground and, more importantly, hard-won experience. Soldiers returned to their bivouacs carrying not only the scars of combat, but a newfound understanding of strategy, teamwork, and courage. The first sustained encounters with Hitler's elite had begun to teach the young troops the realities of modern warfare, preparing them for the long, grueling struggle ahead. They had faced the full measure of the SS, survived, and emerged determined to continue the fight, tempered by fire and experience. The following day, American forces awoke to a landscape scarred by combat. Craters, shattered hedgerows, and smoldering farmhouses bore witness to the fierce clashes of previous engagements. Commanders reviewed intelligence reports and adjusted tactics, aware that Hitler's elite units would exploit any hesitation. Reconnaissance patrols moved cautiously through the bocage, identifying enemy fortifications, sniper positions, and possible ambush points. The soldiers, still weary from prior fighting, understood that survival demanded vigilance, adaptability, and cohesion. Every hedgerow could conceal a deadly threat, and every sunken lane could channel them into a trap, forcing them to blend tactical innovation with unyielding courage. American infantry, now seasoned by 2 days of combat, executed coordinated hedgerow assaults with increasing efficiency. Teams combined suppressive fire with rapid movement. Engineers cleared obstacles, and machine gun squads provided crucial cover for advancing units. Artillery observers relayed coordinates to shell German positions before infantry approached, softening defenses and creating tactical openings. Tank infantry coordination became increasingly sophisticated, with armored units providing mobile firepower and protection in the confined bocage. The battlefield evolved into a theater where discipline, ingenuity, and adaptability allowed Americans to counterbalance the tactical skill of the SS. The Waffen-SS, aware of the Americans' learning curve, intensified their resistance. Counterattacks were precise, coordinated, and often brutal, designed to reclaim lost ground and disrupt supply lines. Mortar and artillery fire targeted exposed positions, forcing American units to improvise constantly. Yet the GIs had begun to recognize patterns in the elite troops' movements. Overconfidence in fortified positions, predictable patrol routines, and repeated firing strategies offered exploitable weaknesses. With each encounter, American soldiers refined their tactics, learning to anticipate the SS and turn the elite forces' strength against them. Amid the relentless fighting, moments of extraordinary bravery continued to emerge. Soldiers risked exposure to enemy fire to rescue comrades, carry ammunition, or neutralize critical positions. Snipers provided cover by eliminating key threats, while machine gun teams allowed infantry to maneuver safely through open ground. These acts of courage were critical in maintaining cohesion and operational effectiveness. Every small victory reinforced morale and demonstrated that ordinary soldiers, when tested under extraordinary circumstances, could rise to meet seemingly insurmountable challenges. By midday, American forces began to secure small but significant gains. Coordination between infantry, artillery, and armor allowed units to hold key positions, gradually eroding the SS' tactical advantage. Observation posts relayed real-time intelligence, guiding adjustments to the battlefield strategy. Each successful maneuver, however incremental, enhanced confidence. Troops who had entered the battle in fear were now executing flanking attacks, coordinated assaults, and defensive maneuvers with a growing sense of competence and tactical awareness. The psychological strain of continuous combat remained immense. Soldiers endured fatigue, fear, and the constant presence of death, yet these pressures forged resilience. Comradeship deepened, as survival depended on trust and cooperation. The GIs learned to anticipate enemy tactics, improvise under fire, and maintain morale despite constant danger. In these conditions, raw recruits transformed into capable, adaptive soldiers, developing the skills and courage that would carry them through the remainder of the Normandy campaign and beyond. The Waffen-SS continued to demonstrate tactical skill and determination, ensuring that no American advance went unchallenged. Every victory was costly, and every maneuver contested. The Americans had learned that elite opposition required more than bravery. It demanded intelligence, improvisation, and constant vigilance. The Normandy bocage became both a proving ground and a crucible, testing soldiers' endurance, resourcefulness, and courage at every step. The young Americans were being forged into an effective fighting force, tempered by fire and experience. As evening approached, the Americans held key ground while the SS regrouped for potential counterattacks. The day's brutal lessons had strengthened their cohesion and confidence, leaving troops both exhausted and battle-hardened. Soldiers returned to makeshift bivouacs, carrying the physical scars of combat and the mental resilience that comes from surviving against an elite adversary. They had faced Hitler's finest, endured, and adapted, gaining the knowledge, skill, and courage that would define the American experience in Europe. The battlefield had taught them that while the enemy was formidable, the combination of ingenuity, teamwork, and relentless determination could overcome even the most elite forces. The morning after another grueling engagement brought a tense quiet over the battered fields of Normandy, but the American commanders knew the calm was deceptive. The Waffen-SS units, seasoned and relentless, were preparing for renewed attacks, analyzing the Americans' movements and searching for weaknesses to exploit. Reconnaissance patrols moved cautiously, cataloging every hedgerow, sunken lane, and ruined farmhouse as potential ambush sites. Soldiers, now battle-hardened yet exhausted, understood that each step forward carried immense risk. The bocage had become a testing ground for ingenuity, adaptability, and the capacity to endure relentless pressure, and every moment demanded focus and courage. American infantry units continued refining their tactics under fire. Small squads coordinated suppressive fire with rapid advances, engineers cleared dense hedgerows, and machine gun teams provided essential cover. Artillery observers directed precise strikes on entrenched German positions, softening defenses before infantry approached. Tank units, operating in tandem with soldiers, created mobile firepower and protected vulnerable flanks. The battlefield had transformed into a dynamic environment, a chessboard where intelligence, coordination, and improvisation allowed the Americans to counter the tactical mastery of Hitler's elite. The Waffen-SS, recognizing the Americans' growing competence, escalated their aggression. Coordinated counterattacks aimed to reclaim lost positions and inflict maximum casualties. Mortars and artillery struck relentlessly, forcing the Americans to adapt constantly. Yet the GIs had begun exploiting patterns in the enemy's tactics. Predictable patrols, repeated firing strategies, and reliance on fortified positions created opportunities for flanking attacks and targeted assaults. Each engagement became a lesson, teaching soldiers how to anticipate elite maneuvers and respond effectively under pressure. Heroism remained a constant amid the chaos. Soldiers risked exposure to enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, carry ammunition, or eliminate critical threats. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated to allow infantry movements, turning individual courage into a force multiplier. These acts, though often unnoticed in the larger narrative, were pivotal to survival and success. They demonstrated that ordinary soldiers, under extreme circumstances, could rise to extraordinary challenges, shaping the battlefield in ways that formal strategy alone could not achieve. By midday, American forces had begun securing incremental gains. Infantry, artillery, and armor worked in concert to hold critical ground, gradually diminishing the SS advantage. Real-time intelligence from observation posts allowed commanders to adjust tactics on the fly. Each small victory reinforced confidence, as soldiers who had entered the field with fear now executed coordinated maneuvers, flanking attacks, and defensive strategies with growing skill. The Americans were no longer merely reacting. They were shaping the battlefield, learning to turn the enemy's strengths into vulnerabilities. The psychological strain remained immense. Soldiers endured fatigue, constant danger, and the sight of fallen comrades. Yet these pressures forged resilience and cohesion. Bonds between men deepened as survival depended on trust, coordination, and mutual support. Young American soldiers were rapidly transforming into adaptive, capable units, able to make split-second decisions and respond creatively to the fluid and lethal environment of combat. The bocage, once an intimidating maze, had become a proving ground for courage, discipline, and innovation. Despite the Americans' growing effectiveness, the Waffen-SS remained a formidable adversary. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. The Americans had learned that victory required not only bravery but constant vigilance, tactical intelligence, and the ability to improvise. The Normandy battlefield had become a crucible, testing the soldiers' physical endurance, mental resilience, and courage. Each engagement revealed lessons in leadership, strategy, and human determination under fire. As night fell, American troops consolidated positions, tending to the wounded and reorganizing for the next day's operations. They had endured continuous pressure from one of the most elite fighting forces in the world and had begun to adapt, learn, and survive. The first sustained encounters with Hitler's elite had begun to forge experience, skill, and confidence. Soldiers returned to makeshift bivouacs, exhausted but battle-hardened, carrying the knowledge that ingenuity, teamwork, and unyielding determination could counter even the deadliest opposition. The stage was set for the relentless push deeper into Normandy, as American forces had proven they could face the full measure of elite German resistance and endure. The next morning, the Normandy countryside lay quiet, deceptively serene, with shattered hedgerows, scorched earth, and abandoned farmhouses marking the previous day's brutal encounters. American commanders knew that the Waffen-SS would not rest. Elite German units were methodically reinforcing defensive positions, laying traps, and preparing to strike with the precision and ruthlessness that had earned them their fearsome reputation. Troops, still recovering from exhaustion, understood that every step forward could mean sudden engagement. Every hedge or sunken lane could conceal a deadly ambush. The landscape had become a crucible, testing not only the Americans' physical endurance, but their capacity for quick thinking, adaptability, and courage under relentless pressure. American infantry units, now seasoned by continuous combat, moved with increasing coordination and confidence. Suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and carefully timed advances were combined with the engineers' efforts to breach dense hedgerows. Observation posts relayed accurate coordinates for artillery strikes, softening enemy positions before troops advanced. Tank units operated in close support, covering infantry movements and neutralizing machine gun nests. The battlefield had evolved into a complex environment where strategy, improvisation, and disciplined execution allowed the Americans to counter the tactical expertise of Hitler's elite. The Waffen-SS responded with calculated aggression, aiming to reclaim lost ground and disrupt American advances. Mortar and artillery fire was relentless, forcing constant adjustments and improvisation from the GIs. Yet, patterns began to emerge in the elite enemy's operations. Overconfidence in fortified positions, predictable patrol routines, and repeated ambush strategies. By observing and analyzing these patterns, American soldiers began to anticipate SS movements and exploit their vulnerabilities. Each encounter became a lesson, hard-won under fire, demonstrating that adaptability, discipline, and courage could challenge even the most elite forces. Amid the chaos, acts of extraordinary bravery continued to define the battle. Soldiers risked exposure to enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, deliver critical ammunition, or neutralize key threats. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated to allow infantry advances, turning individual courage into collective survival. These moments, though often overshadowed by larger strategic considerations, were essential to the cohesion and effectiveness of the American forces. They illustrated how ordinary men, when tested under extreme circumstances, could perform extraordinary deeds that directly shaped the outcome of engagements. By midday, American forces began consolidating small but significant gains. Infantry, artillery, and armored units worked in tandem to hold key terrain, gradually eroding the tactical advantage of the SS. Intelligence from reconnaissance teams allowed commanders to adjust strategy in real time. Each successful maneuver, however incremental, boosted morale and confidence. Soldiers who had entered the day fearful and inexperienced were now executing coordinated attacks, flanking operations, and defensive measures with growing competence. The Americans were transforming the battlefield from a deadly trap into a controlled operational space, leveraging adaptability and ingenuity against elite opposition. The psychological strain of continuous combat was profound. Exhaustion, fear, and the witnessing of comrades' deaths weighed heavily on every soldier. Yet these pressures forged resilience and unity. Bonds between men deepened, as survival depended on trust, communication, and cooperation. Raw recruits rapidly became adaptive, capable soldiers, able to make quick decisions under pressure and respond to the unpredictable dynamics of combat. The bocage, once a maze of terror, had become a proving ground for courage, discipline, and tactical innovation. Despite incremental progress, the Waffen-SS remained a formidable adversary. Every advance by American forces was met with resistance, every maneuver contested, and every misstep punished. The elite troops' skill, training, and ideological commitment ensured that the Americans could not advance without cost. The battlefields of Normandy became a harsh school, where lessons in leadership, strategy, endurance, and human courage were imparted under fire. Each encounter underscored the difficulty of overcoming a highly trained, ruthless, and adaptive enemy. As evening fell, the Americans consolidated their positions, tending to the wounded and reorganizing for the next day's operations. They had endured unrelenting pressure from some of the most disciplined soldiers in the world and were beginning to adapt, survive, and gain confidence. The first sustained confrontations with Hitler's elite had forged both experience and cohesion. Exhausted, battle-hardened, and resolute, the American soldiers returned to their bivouacs with the knowledge that ingenuity, teamwork, and unwavering determination could counter even the deadliest opposition. The stage was set for the continued push into Normandy, where the full measure of courage, skill, and resilience would be tested in the days to come. The next morning, the remnants of shattered hedgerows and scorched fields bore silent witness to the ferocity of previous days. But the Americans knew there would be no respite. Reconnaissance units reported that the Waffen-SS was reinforcing key positions, laying new traps, and preparing for counteroffensives with the meticulous precision that had earned them a fearsome reputation. Every sunken lane, farmhouse, and ridge could conceal lethal fire. American commanders emphasized coordination, reconnaissance, and adaptability. The young soldiers, seasoned by consecutive days of combat, understood that every movement could mean life or death, and each engagement demanded ingenuity, courage, and relentless focus. Infantry units had become increasingly efficient in navigating the treacherous bocage. Suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and rapid movement were coordinated with engineers clearing hedgerows for both infantry and armor. Artillery observers relayed accurate coordinates to soften German positions prior to engagement, while tanks provided mobile firepower and shielded infantry from concentrated enemy fire. The battlefield had evolved into a highly dynamic environment, where adaptive strategy, discipline, and quick decision-making were essential for survival. Soldiers learned to anticipate danger and exploit opportunities, turning the tactical tables on even the elite SS. The Waffen-SS responded with calculated ferocity. Counterattacks were precise, disciplined, and relentless, designed to regain lost ground and disrupt supply lines. Mortar and artillery fire forced Americans to improvise continuously, testing endurance and cohesion. Yet over the course of repeated engagements, American soldiers began to recognize patterns in the enemy's tactics: predictable patrols, repeated firing positions, and reliance on fortified hedgerows. Exploiting these weaknesses, troops conducted flanking maneuvers and precision strikes, gradually transforming fear into confidence and inexperience into tactical competence. Acts of individual heroism remained crucial to survival. Soldiers risked exposure to enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, carry supplies, or eliminate high-threat positions. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated with advancing infantry to suppress enemy fire and secure tactical advantages. These courageous actions, often unseen in the larger historical narrative, were essential to maintaining morale, cohesion, and operational effectiveness. They demonstrated the extraordinary capability of ordinary men when confronted with extraordinary circumstances, shaping the course of engagements in ways that strategic planning alone could not. By midday, American forces were consolidating incremental gains. Infantry, artillery, and armored units worked in concert to hold key terrain, steadily eroding the tactical advantage of the SS. Observation posts and reconnaissance relayed real-time intelligence, allowing commanders to adjust strategies on the fly. Each small success reinforced confidence, transforming fear into competence. Soldiers who had entered the battle with trepidation were now executing coordinated flanking attacks, defensive measures, and combined maneuvers with growing skill, gradually taking control of the chaotic and lethal battlefield environment. The psychological strain remained immense. Soldiers endured fatigue, fear, and the trauma of witnessing the deaths of comrades. Yet these pressures forged resilience and unity. Bonds between men deepened, built on trust, coordination, and shared determination. Raw recruits evolved rapidly into capable, adaptive soldiers, capable of making split-second decisions under pressure and responding to the fluid, lethal environment of combat. The bocage, once an almost impenetrable maze, had become a proving ground for courage, innovation, and disciplined action. Despite these growing capabilities, the Waffen-SS remained a formidable opponent. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every misstep punished. The elite German unit's skill, training, and ideological commitment ensured that the Americans faced continuous high-stakes engagements. Normandy had become a brutal school where lessons in endurance, leadership, strategy, and human courage were imparted daily. Each confrontation emphasized the cost of victory and the evolving strengths of the American forces. By evening, American troops held critical positions, tended to the wounded, and reorganized for the next day's operations. They had endured repeated assaults from one of the most elite military forces in the world and were beginning to adapt, survive, and gain confidence. Exhausted yet battle-hardened, the soldiers carried the knowledge that ingenuity, teamwork, and relentless determination could counter even the deadliest opposition. The stage was set for the next phase of the Normandy campaign, where courage, skill, and resilience would again be tested under fire. The dawn of the 11th day of fighting cast a fragile light across the broken Normandy landscape, illuminating fields torn by artillery, hedgerows reduced to splintered timber, and farmhouses riddled with bullet holes. American commanders surveyed the terrain with grim determination, aware that the Waffen-SS was regrouping with meticulous precision, ready to strike again. Reconnaissance patrols scouted the hedgerows and sunken lanes, seeking signs of enemy movement, but the danger remained omnipresent. Every shadow, every ridge, every partially destroyed building could conceal death. The soldiers, hardened by days of brutal combat, knew that each engagement would test their courage, adaptability, and endurance. Infantry units moved with a growing sense of coordination and efficiency. Suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and rapid hedgerow advances were conducted in tight synchronization. Engineers cleared obstacles while observation posts relayed precise artillery coordinates, softening enemy positions ahead of infantry movements. Tank units provided mobile firepower and protected vulnerable flanks, allowing squads to maneuver safely. The battlefield had become a dynamic system, where discipline, tactical acumen, and innovation were essential to counter the lethal efficiency of Hitler's elite forces. Each movement required anticipation, timing, and decisive action under fire. The Waffen-SS launched relentless counterattacks, their strategy precise and unyielding. Mortar and artillery fire rained on American positions, forcing continual adaptation and improvisation. Patterns in the elite troops' tactics became apparent to the Americans. Predictable patrol routes, repeated firing strategies, and over-reliance on fortified positions. By observing these tendencies, American squads executed flanking attacks, coordinated assaults, and precision strikes. Each engagement, brutal and chaotic, served as a lesson in anticipating enemy behavior and exploiting vulnerabilities in one of the most skilled military organizations of the war. Amid the violence, acts of extraordinary courage continued to define the battlefield. Soldiers risked their lives to rescue wounded comrades, deliver ammunition under fire, or neutralize critical threats. Snipers coordinated with machine gun teams to provide cover for advancing infantry, turning individual bravery into collective survival. These actions, often unseen in larger narratives, were pivotal in sustaining morale, cohesion, and operational effectiveness. They illustrated that ordinary soldiers, when pushed to extremes, could perform extraordinary feats, shaping the outcome of battles in ways that formal strategy alone could not achieve. By midday, American forces began to consolidate hard-won territorial gains. Infantry, armor, and artillery worked in tandem to secure strategic positions, gradually eroding the SS operational advantage. Observation posts relayed real-time intelligence, enabling commanders to adapt tactics in response to shifting conditions. Each successful maneuver reinforced confidence, transforming fear into capability. Troops who had entered the engagement inexperienced and anxious were now executing flanking movements, defensive positioning, and combined arms maneuvers with growing skill, gradually gaining control of the chaotic, lethal battlefield environment. The psychological toll remained immense. Soldiers endured exhaustion, fear, and the trauma of witnessing death and destruction. Yet these pressures forged resilience and strengthened camaraderie. Bonds among soldiers deepened, as survival relied on trust, coordination, and shared determination. Raw recruits evolved into adaptive, capable combatants, able to make split-second decisions under fire and respond to the unpredictable and deadly dynamics of the battlefield. The bocage, once an almost impenetrable maze, had become a proving ground for courage, tactical innovation, and disciplined action. Despite their growing effectiveness, the Waffen-SS remained an extraordinarily dangerous adversary. Every American advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. The elite German unit's skill, training, and ideological commitment ensured that American forces faced continuous high-stakes engagement. Normandy had become a relentless classroom where lessons in endurance, leadership, strategy, and human courage were imparted daily. Each confrontation demonstrated both the immense cost of survival and the emerging strength of the American army. As night fell, the Americans consolidated positions, treated the wounded, and prepared for the following day's operations. They had endured relentless assaults from one of the most disciplined and lethal fighting forces in the world, emerging stronger, more cohesive, and battle-hardened. Exhausted but resolute, the soldiers understood that ingenuity, teamwork, and determination were as critical as firepower in overcoming elite opposition. The stage was set for the continued push deeper into Normandy, where courage, skill, and resilience would again be tested against Hitler's most formidable troops. The dawn of the 11th day of fighting cast a fragile light across the broken Normandy landscape, illuminating fields torn by artillery, hedgerows reduced to splintered timber, and farmhouses riddled with bullet holes. American commanders surveyed the terrain with grim determination, aware that the Waffen-SS was regrouping with meticulous precision, ready to strike again. Reconnaissance patrols scouted the hedgerows and sunken lanes, seeking signs of enemy movement, but the danger remained omnipresent. Every shadow, every ridge, every partially destroyed building could conceal death. The soldiers, hardened by days of brutal combat, knew that each engagement would test their courage, adaptability, and endurance. Infantry units moved with a growing sense of coordination and efficiency. Suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and rapid hedgerow advances were conducted in tight synchronization. Engineers cleared obstacles while observation posts relayed precise artillery coordinates, softening enemy positions ahead of infantry movements. Tank units provided mobile firepower and protected vulnerable flanks, allowing squads to maneuver safely. The battlefield had become a dynamic system, where discipline, tactical acumen, and innovation were essential to counter the lethal efficiency of Hitler's elite forces. Each movement required anticipation, timing, and decisive action under fire. The Waffen-SS launched relentless counterattacks, their strategy precise and unyielding. Mortar and artillery fire rained on American positions, forcing continual adaptation and improvisation. Patterns in the elite troops' tactics became apparent to the Americans. Predictable patrol routes, repeated firing strategies, and over-reliance on fortified positions. By observing these tendencies, American squads executed flanking attacks, coordinated assaults, and precision strikes. Each engagement, brutal and chaotic, served as a lesson in anticipating enemy behavior and exploiting vulnerabilities in one of the most skilled military organizations of the war. Amid the violence, acts of extraordinary courage continued to define the battlefield. Soldiers risked their lives to rescue wounded comrades, deliver ammunition under fire, or neutralize critical threats. Snipers coordinated with machine gun teams to provide cover for advancing infantry, turning individual bravery into collective survival. These actions, often unseen in larger narratives, were pivotal in sustaining morale, cohesion, and operational effectiveness. They illustrated that ordinary soldiers, when pushed to extremes, could perform extraordinary feats, shaping the outcome of battles in ways that formal strategy alone could not achieve. By midday, American forces began to consolidate hard-won territorial gains. Infantry, armor, and artillery worked in tandem to secure strategic positions, gradually eroding the SS operational advantage. Observation posts relayed real-time intelligence, enabling commanders to adapt tactics in response to shifting conditions. Each successful maneuver reinforced confidence, transforming fear into capability. Troops who had entered the engagement inexperienced and anxious were now executing flanking movements, defensive positioning, and combined arms maneuvers with growing skill, gradually gaining control of the chaotic, lethal battlefield environment. The psychological toll remained immense. Soldiers endured exhaustion, fear, and the trauma of witnessing death and destruction. Yet these pressures forged resilience and strengthened camaraderie. Bonds among soldiers deepened, as survival relied on trust, coordination, and shared determination. Raw recruits evolved into adaptive, capable combatants, able to make split-second decisions under fire and respond to the unpredictable and deadly dynamics of the battlefield. The bocage, once an almost impenetrable maze, had become a proving ground for courage, tactical innovation, and disciplined action. Despite their growing effectiveness, the Waffen-SS remained an extraordinarily dangerous adversary. Every American advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. The elite German unit's skill, training, and ideological commitment ensured that American forces faced continuous high-stakes engagement. Normandy had become a relentless classroom where lessons in endurance, leadership, strategy, and human courage were imparted daily. Each confrontation demonstrated both the immense cost of survival and the emerging strength of the American army. As night fell, The Americans consolidated positions, treated the wounded, and prepared for the following day's operations. They had endured relentless assaults from one of the most disciplined and lethal fighting forces in the world, emerging stronger, more cohesive, and battle-hardened. Exhausted but resolute, the soldiers understood that ingenuity, teamwork, and determination were as critical as firepower in overcoming elite opposition. The stage was set for the continued push deeper into Normandy, where courage, skill, and resilience would again be tested against Hitler's most formidable troops. The dawn of the 13th day rose over Normandy, illuminating fields scarred by shell craters, destroyed hedgerows, and ruined farmhouses. The Americans, battle-hardened and vigilant, understood that the Waffen-SS would strike again with calculated precision. Reconnaissance units cautiously probed the terrain, noting fortified positions, likely ambush points, and patterns in enemy movement. Soldiers, conditioned by days of relentless combat, recognized that every action carried risk. Each hedgerow, ridge, and ruin was both a tactical challenge and a lesson, forcing men to adapt, anticipate, and survive in a landscape shaped by destruction and danger. Infantry units moved with increased discipline and coordination. Suppressive fire covered advancing squads while engineers breached dense hedgerows to allow infantry and tanks to maneuver. Artillery observers relayed precise coordinates, softening SS positions before direct engagement. Tanks operated in close support with infantry, neutralizing fortified positions and covering vulnerable flanks. The battlefield had evolved into a complex, ever-changing environment where coordination, improvisation, and tactical intelligence allowed Americans to counteract the deadly efficiency of Hitler's elite troops. Each engagement demanded focus, decisiveness, and courage. The Waffen-SS reacted with disciplined, ruthless counterattacks. Mortar and artillery fire fell incessantly, testing endurance and cohesion. Yet, American soldiers had begun to recognize patterns: repeated patrols, reliance on fortified hedgerows, and predictable firing sequences. By exploiting these patterns, squads executed flanking maneuvers, coordinated assaults, and targeted strikes with increasing effectiveness. Each encounter, brutal and chaotic, taught soldiers lessons in anticipating elite tactics and exploiting enemy weaknesses, transforming fear into confidence and inexperience into tactical competence. Acts of individual bravery continued to define the battlefield. Soldiers risked life under heavy fire to rescue wounded comrades, deliver essential supplies, or neutralize critical threats. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated with advancing squads to suppress enemy fire, turning individual heroism into collective survival. These deeds, often invisible in larger narratives, were crucial to maintaining morale, cohesion, and operational effectiveness. They demonstrated that ordinary men, when placed under extraordinary circumstances, could perform feats that directly shaped the outcome of engagements. By midday, American forces were consolidating hard-won gains. Infantry, armor, and artillery coordinated closely to hold key terrain, steadily eroding the SS advantage. Observation posts provided real-time intelligence, enabling commanders to adjust tactics dynamically. Each successful maneuver, no matter how small, reinforced confidence. Soldiers who had entered the battlefield with trepidation now executed flanking attacks, defensive operations, and combined maneuvers with growing proficiency. The Americans were beginning to control the tempo of battle, turning chaos into calculated advantage. The psychological toll remained immense. Fatigue, fear, and witnessing the deaths of comrades tested every soldier. Yet these pressures forged resilience, unity, and courage. Bonds among men deepened as survival relied on trust, communication, and shared determination. Raw recruits rapidly transformed into capable, adaptive soldiers, able to respond to shifting conditions, make quick decisions, and endure under extreme stress. The bocage, once a confounding maze, had become a proving ground for innovation, discipline, and bravery. Despite growing competence, the Waffen-SS remained a formidable adversary. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. Elite training, tactical skill, and ideological commitment ensured that survival required careful planning, precise execution, and relentless perseverance. Normandy had become a crucible where endurance, leadership, and courage were tested daily. Each engagement revealed both the immense cost of combat and the rising strength of the American army. As night fell, the Americans consolidated positions, cared for the wounded, and prepared for the next day's operations. They had endured repeated assaults from elite forces, adapting, learning, and surviving under extreme pressure. Exhausted yet resolute, the soldiers carried the knowledge that ingenuity, teamwork, and determination could overcome even the most disciplined and lethal opposition. The stage was set for the continued struggle, where every man would again be tested against Hitler's finest, their courage and resilience the deciding factors in the battles to come. The 14th day dawned over a Normandy countryside marked by devastation and the echoes of previous combat. Craters scarred the fields, hedgerows lay splintered, and farmhouses bore the scars of relentless artillery fire. American commanders, aware of the Waffen-SS's discipline and tactical acumen, prepared their troops for another day of deadly engagement. Reconnaissance patrols probed cautiously, mapping enemy fortifications and ambush points, while soldiers, increasingly hardened by continuous fighting, internalized the lessons of the bocage. Every step forward demanded vigilance, courage, and tactical awareness, as the terrain itself had become a lethal teacher. Infantry units moved with disciplined precision. Suppressive fire covered advancing squads, engineers cleared dense hedgerows, and observation posts relayed accurate artillery coordinates to weaken SS positions before infantry engagement. Tanks advanced in close coordination with soldiers, neutralizing fortified positions and providing critical protection for flanks. The battlefield had evolved into a high-stakes environment where coordination, improvisation, and tactical intelligence were essential for survival. Each maneuver required anticipation, decisiveness, and the ability to adapt under fire, turning the chaos of combat into structured, effective operations. The Waffen-SS launched relentless, coordinated counterattacks, seeking to regain lost ground and disrupt American advances. Mortar and artillery fire rained down, forcing constant improvisation and strategic thinking. Over time, American troops began to discern patterns in SS tactics: predictable patrol routes, repeated firing positions, and heavy reliance on fortified hedgerows. Exploiting these tendencies, soldiers executed flanking maneuvers, precision strikes, and coordinated assaults with increasing success. Each engagement, brutal and unforgiving, reinforced lessons in anticipating elite strategies and converting tactical insight into operational advantage. Individual heroism remained crucial on the battlefield. Soldiers exposed themselves to enemy fire to rescue wounded comrades, carry essential supplies, or neutralize high-threat positions. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated with advancing infantry to suppress enemy fire and facilitate maneuvers. These acts, often invisible in broader histories, were vital for sustaining cohesion, morale, and operational effectiveness. They demonstrated that ordinary men, when pushed to extremes, could perform extraordinary feats, shaping the outcome of engagements through courage, skill, and determination. By midday, American forces consolidated incremental gains. Infantry, armor, and artillery units worked in close coordination to secure strategic terrain, steadily reducing the SS tactical advantage. Observation posts relayed real-time intelligence, allowing commanders to adjust tactics dynamically. Each successful maneuver, however small, reinforced morale and confidence. Soldiers who had entered the battle inexperienced were now executing flanking attacks, defensive operations, and combined arms maneuvers with growing proficiency. Americans were beginning to dictate the tempo of combat, turning chaos into controlled advantage. The psychological toll of continuous combat remained severe. Exhaustion, fear, and witnessing the deaths of comrades weighed heavily. Yet these pressures forged resilience, unity, and courage. Bonds among men strengthened as survival depended on trust, communication, and collective determination. Raw recruits transformed rapidly into adaptive, capable soldiers, able to respond to shifting battlefield conditions, make split-second decisions, and endure extreme stress. The bocage, once a maze of terror, had become a proving ground for discipline, innovation, and bravery. Despite the Americans' growing capabilities, the Waffen-SS remained a deadly and adaptable adversary. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every lapse punished. Elite training, tactical skill, and ideological commitment ensured that victory would demand perseverance, precise execution, and constant vigilance. Normandy had become a crucible where endurance, leadership, and human courage were tested continuously. Each engagement revealed the cost of survival and the emerging strength and resilience of the American army. As night fell, the Americans consolidated positions, tended to the wounded, and prepared for the next day's operations. They had endured repeated assaults from one of the most disciplined forces in the world, adapting, learning, and surviving against extraordinary opposition. Exhausted yet resolute, the soldiers carried the knowledge that ingenuity, teamwork, and relentless determination were as vital as firepower in overcoming elite opposition. The stage was set for the final phase of the Normandy struggle, where courage, skill, and resilience would again be tested to their limits. The 15th day dawned over Normandy with a brittle, gray light, casting long shadows over fields scarred by shell craters, splintered hedgerows, and the wreckage of farmhouses. American commanders gathered for a final assessment, aware that the Waffen-SS, despite losses, remained a deadly and disciplined force. Reconnaissance patrols reported signs of regrouping, fortified positions, and carefully laid ambushes. Every ridge, hedgerow, and ruined structure could conceal lethal fire. Soldiers, hardened by 2 weeks of continuous combat, now understood that survival required not only courage but acute observation, tactical intelligence, and the seamless coordination that could turn deadly chaos into operational advantage. Infantry units moved with unprecedented coordination. Suppressive fire was synchronized with squad advances. Engineers breached dense hedgerows to allow tanks and infantry movement, and artillery observers relayed precise coordinates to neutralize fortified positions. Tank units operated in close support, covering flanks, eliminating machine gun nests, and providing mobile firepower. The battlefield had become a complex and fluid environment where discipline, adaptability, and tactical foresight allowed the Americans to confront one of the most elite fighting forces in history. Each maneuver was a calculated risk, executed with focus, courage, and ingenuity. The Waffen-SS, ever adaptive, mounted counterattacks with precision and ferocity. Mortars and artillery fell relentlessly, testing both endurance and cohesion. Over the course of the campaign, American soldiers had discerned patterns in elite tactics, predictable patrols, reliance on fortified positions, and repeated firing strategies. By exploiting these patterns, troops executed coordinated flanking maneuvers, precision strikes, and combined assaults, gradually eroding the tactical advantage of the SS. Each engagement underscored the value of observation, analysis, and adaptive execution, transforming fear into confidence and raw recruits into battle-tested soldiers. Acts of individual courage continued to define the battlefield. Soldiers risked life under heavy fire to rescue wounded comrades, deliver critical supplies, or neutralize high-threat positions. Snipers and machine gun teams coordinated with advancing squads, turning personal bravery into collective survival. These actions, though often invisible in broader histories, were pivotal in maintaining morale, cohesion, and operational effectiveness. They demonstrated that ordinary soldiers, when tested under extraordinary conditions, could rise to perform feats that shaped the outcome of entire battles. By midday, American forces had consolidated significant territorial gains. Infantry, armor, and artillery units worked in concert to hold key terrain, reducing the SS operational advantage and breaking the momentum of their elite counterattacks. Observation posts provided vital real-time intelligence, allowing commanders to adapt strategies dynamically. Each successful maneuver, however small, reinforced morale and hardened resolve. Soldiers who had entered Normandy fearful and inexperienced now executed flanking attacks, defensive operations, and combined arms maneuvers with growing skill, asserting control over an environment that had once been an almost impenetrable maze of danger. The psychological burden remained severe. Exhaustion, fear, and the trauma of witnessing death and destruction weighed heavily on every soldier. Yet these pressures forged resilience, discipline, and unity. Comradeship deepened, rooted in trust, shared risk, and mutual reliance. Raw recruits had transformed into capable, adaptive soldiers, capable of split-second decision-making, improvisation, and survival under extreme stress. The bocage, once a deadly labyrinth, had become a proving ground for courage, tactical ingenuity, and endurance. Despite the Americans' growing mastery of the battlefield, the Waffen-SS remained a dangerous adversary. Every advance was contested, every maneuver anticipated, and every miscalculation punished. Elite training, tactical skill, and ideological commitment ensured that success required careful planning, precise execution, and relentless determination. Normandy had become a crucible of human endurance, leadership, and courage, teaching lessons in strategy, adaptability, and the limits of human fortitude. Each engagement revealed both the cost of survival and the emerging strength of the American forces. As evening fell on the 15th day, American troops consolidated their positions, tended to the wounded, and prepared for the next phase of the campaign. They had endured continuous assaults from Hitler's elite, learning to adapt, survive, and overcome extraordinary challenges. Exhausted yet battle-hardened, they carried with them the knowledge that courage, teamwork, ingenuity, and relentless determination could counter even the most formidable opposition. The Americans had faced Hitler's finest and endured, and in doing so, they had forged the experience, skill, and resilience that would carry them through the remainder of the war. The battle for Normandy had transformed fear into confidence, chaos into strategy, and ordinary soldiers into an extraordinary force capable of shaping the course of history.